I still remember the day my world fell apart. It was a chilly Thursday evening when I discovered my wife, Sarah, was having an affair with her boss. The revelation didn't come from suspicious behavior or vague accusations. It was undeniable proof, a message on her phone, left open on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I didn't intend to snoop, but my eyes caught the glowing screen. Words that felt like knives. Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again at the office tomorrow. My blood ran cold. My mind refused to process it, but the evidence was right there in front of me. For days I wrestled with how to confront her. We had been married for 18 years, built a home, raised a beautiful daughter, Emily, who was now 22 and getting ready for her big wedding day. Our life wasn't perfect, but I thought it was strong. I was wrong. The trust we had was gone, and the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else was a stranger to me now. When I finally gathered the courage, I didn't yell or scream. I sat Sarah down one evening and told her what I'd found. Her face turned pale and tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to explain. She just said, "I'm sorry." Sorry? That was it? Those two words shattered everything I had worked so hard to protect. But I wasn't the type to crumble. If she had destroyed our marriage, I was determined to make her regret it. Quietly, I started planning my revenge, not out of malice, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal. Little did I know that this path would lead to a moment of reckoning years later at Emily's wedding, where Sarah's confession would leave everyone speechless. After Sarah's apology, if I could even call it that, I moved out of our bedroom. I told her I needed space, but the truth was I couldn't bear to look at her. Every time I saw her face, I thought of the betrayal, of the man she had chosen over me. She kept asking if we could talk, if we could work through it, but I shut her down every time. My silence was my punishment for her. It wasn't long before I began executing my plan. I was deliberate, careful. I knew that a messy, immediate reaction would only backfire. Instead, I decided to dismantle her life piece by piece, just as she had dismantled my trust. The first thing I did was gather proof. I downloaded every incriminating message I could find. I printed out screenshots and even managed to dig up receipts for the expensive dinners and gifts her boss had lavished on her, gifts she had hidden from me. This wasn't just about humiliation. I wanted a record, something undeniable that I could wield if needed. Then I turned my attention to her job. Sarah worked at a marketing firm where her boss, Michael, the man she had betrayed me with, was a respected figure. I had no intention of letting them continue their affair without consequences. Using a tip line, I anonymously sent their HR department the messages I had found. Their relationship violated company policies, and I knew it would stir up trouble. Within weeks, Sarah came home with tears in her eyes. "They fired him," she whispered, her voice trembling. I acted surprised. "Why?" I asked, feigning concern. "Someone reported us," she said, her words heavy with fear. I could tell she suspected it was me, but she didn't dare accuse me outright. Not yet. I didn't stop there. Quietly, I began separating our finances. I funneled money into a private account she couldn't access. I met with a lawyer, laying out everything I had discovered and ensuring that I would come out ahead in the divorce. Through it all, I maintained a calm facade. I didn't want her to see how much her actions had hurt me. I wanted her to think I had already moved on. But the truth was I hadn't. I couldn't. Every time I thought about Emily's wedding, I felt a pang of guilt. She was innocent in all this, and I didn't want my bitterness to ruin her big day. So, I kept my revenge focused on Sarah, waiting for the right moment to strike the final blow. That moment came sooner than I expected. Months passed and Sarah's life began to unravel just as I had planned. Without her boss's protection, her career stalled. She tried to find a new job, but the industry was small, and whispers of the scandal followed her everywhere. Our once confident, composed Sarah now seemed like a shell of herself, nervous, unsure, and constantly looking over her shoulder. I should have felt satisfied, but deep down there was a strange emptiness. This wasn't the victory I had imagined. I wasn't happier, I was just numb. The only thing that kept me moving forward was Emily. She was my light, the one good thing that had come from my marriage to Sarah. Emily and I had always been close, and after the separation she became my anchor. When she announced her engagement to Liam, I threw myself into helping with the wedding. Emily deserved nothing less than perfection, and I wanted her day to be free from the chaos of what was happening between her mother and me. Sarah, for all her faults, seemed just as determined to keep things peaceful for Emily's sake. We rarely spoke except to discuss wedding details, and even then it was brief and businesslike. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Emily chose a stunning venue, a sprawling garden estate with blooming flowers and twinkling lights that would make her day feel like a fairy tale. Sarah and I both attended tastings, fittings, and rehearsals, always maintaining a polite distance. To anyone watching, we might have looked like two amicable exes putting their daughter first. Only Emily and a few close friends knew the truth. We were barely speaking. Despite the tension, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as the big day approached. Emily had grown into an incredible woman, strong, kind, and resilient. She reminded me of what life had been like before Sarah's betrayal, when our family was whole. I knew I would do anything to protect her happiness. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Sarah was acting different. She seemed preoccupied, almost nervous, as if she were carrying a heavy burden. At first, I chalked it up to wedding stress, but there were moments, quick glances, lingering silences, that made me wonder if she was hiding something. I told myself I was imagining things, but the feeling wouldn't go away. On the day of the wedding, everything was perfect. The sun was shining, the guests were smiling, and Emily looked radiant as she walked down the aisle. For a moment, it felt like all the pain and bitterness had melted away. I even managed to exchange a genuine smile with Sarah during the ceremony, though it was brief. But the calm didn't last. As we moved into the reception, Sarah approached me. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I frowned. "Can't it wait?" I asked. "This is Emily's day. Let's not ruin it." She shook her head. "It's about Emily. It's about us. Please just hear me out." I didn't know it then, but what she was about to say would change everything. I followed Sarah outside, away from the laughter and music of the reception. She led me to a quiet corner of the garden, where the dim glow of fairy lights barely illuminated her face. Her expression was a mixture of fear and desperation, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of unease. Whatever she was about to tell me, it wasn't going to be simple. She hesitated, wringing her hands together. "I've been carrying this for years," she began, her voice shaking. "And I can't keep it to myself anymore. Not with Emily starting this new chapter in her life. She deserves to know the truth, and so do you." My chest tightened. "What are you talking about, Sarah? What truth?" She swallowed hard, looking down at her feet as if the ground might offer her an escape. "It's about Emily," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She's not your daughter." The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "What the hell are you saying?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Don't you dare." She cut me off, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I should have told you years ago, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to break our family." My mind was racing, the ground beneath me spinning. "Who?" I forced myself to ask, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "It was Michael," she admitted, her voice cracking. "It happened before he became my boss, before we got married. I found out I was pregnant right after our wedding. I didn't know how to tell you, so she broke off, sobbing uncontrollably. I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. Emily wasn't mine? The girl I had raised, loved, and protected for 22 years? The one bright spot in my life, the reason I had endured Sarah's betrayal without losing myself completely? "No," I said, shaking my head. "This can't be true. You're lying." Sarah looked at me with pleading eyes. "I wish I was," she said. "But it's the truth. I've had to live with it every day, watching you love her, knowing what I'd done. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was afraid you'd leave us. And then, when everything fell apart, I thought it was too late." The anger bubbled up inside me, raw and uncontrollable. "You let me believe she was mine," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You let me love her, raise her, sacrifice for her, and now, at her wedding, you decide to drop this bomb?" She nodded, guilt written all over her face. "I know I've hurt you, but I couldn't keep it in anymore. Emily deserves the truth, and so do you." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. My entire life felt like a lie, and yet, in the midst of the chaos, one thought stood out. What would this do to Emily? "She can never know," I said firmly, my voice cold. "Not today, not ever. Do you understand me? You've already done enough damage. I won't let you destroy her happiness." Sarah nodded, her tears falling silently. "I understand," she whispered. "But I had to tell you. I couldn't live with the lie anymore." I turned away from her, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal, anger, sadness, and a deep, aching love for the girl I had always considered my daughter. No matter what Sarah had done, Emily was still mine in every way that mattered. But as I walked back to the reception, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. I returned to the reception, but everything felt different now, like the ground beneath my feet wasn't steady anymore. The music played, the guests laughed, and Emily beamed with happiness as she danced with Liam. But all I could see was Sarah's tear-streaked face and hear her words echoing in my mind. "She's not your daughter." I stood near the bar, nursing a drink, trying to steady myself. Sarah had stayed outside, giving me space, but I could feel her absence like a weight pressing on my chest. A million thoughts raced through my mind. Should I confront Emily? Should I pretend everything was fine? Could I even look her in the eye without breaking down? Emily spotted me from across the room and made her way over. Her smile was radiant, the kind of smile that could light up an entire room. "Dad," she said, wrapping her arms around me, "are you okay? You've been quiet all day." For a moment I froze. Dad. The word hit differently now and I hated myself for it. But I forced a smile and hugged her back. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just overwhelmed. You look so beautiful tonight." Her eyes sparkled as she laughed. "That's your way of saying you're emotional, isn't it? It's okay, you can cry. I won't judge." I chuckled though my chest felt tight. "Not today," I said, ruffling her hair like I used to when she was little. "Today's about you, not me." She gave me a playful pout but didn't press further. "Okay, but if you want to dance later, I'm saving a spot for you." She kissed my cheek and disappeared back into the crowd, leaving me standing there, torn between love and devastation. As the night went on, I tried to immerse myself in the celebration, but Sarah's revelation hung over me like a storm cloud. I couldn't ignore the cracks in the facade anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, was unraveling. The final blow came during the father-daughter dance. The song Emily had chosen was one we used to play together when she was a child, a song that had always been our song. As we swayed on the dance floor, her head resting on my shoulder, the memories flooded back. Her first steps, her school recitals, the nights we stayed up late watching movies. Every moment felt real, but now they were tinged with doubt. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered as the song ended. "For everything. For being my rock, my hero. I wouldn't be here without you." Her words broke me. I held her tightly, blinking back tears. "You'll always be my little girl," I said, my voice cracking. And in that moment, I made a decision. Sarah's confession might have changed the truth, but it didn't change my heart. Emily was my daughter in every way that mattered, and no secret, no betrayal could take that away from me. But what I didn't know was that Sarah wasn't done yet. Later that night, she made a choice that would send shockwaves through all of our lives. The reception was winding down and most of the guests had left. Only close family and a few friends remained, lingering in the soft glow of the garden lights. Emily and Liam were laughing together, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that the worst was behind us, that Sarah had said her piece and we could somehow move forward without Emily ever finding out. But then I saw her. Sarah was standing near the microphone on the stage, looking out at the small group of guests. Her face was pale and her hands were trembling, but her eyes held a strange resolve. My heart sank. "What is she doing?" I muttered under my breath, starting to move toward her. Before I could stop her, she tapped the microphone, drawing everyone's attention. The sound echoed through the garden, silencing the chatter. Emily turned to look at her mother, curiosity written on her face. "I'd like to say a few words," Sarah began, her voice unsteady. "It's been such a beautiful day and I'm so proud of Emily and Liam. Seeing them so happy has reminded me of what really matters in life. Honesty, love, and family." I froze in place, dread pooling in my stomach. I knew where this was going. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "But there's something I need to say. Something I've been holding on to for far too long. It's a truth I should have spoken years ago, but I was too afraid. Today, though, I can't hide it anymore." I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. "Sarah, don't," I said, my voice low but firm. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't stop. She turned back to the crowd, her gaze settling on Emily. "Emily," she said, her voice breaking. "There's something you need to know. Something about your father." The air seemed to leave the garden all at once. Emily's smile faltered, confusion clouding her face. "What are you talking about, Mom?" she asked, her tone uneasy. Sarah glanced at me one last time, silently begging for forgiveness, before turning back to Emily. "Your father," she began, but I couldn't let her finish. "Enough," I shouted, my voice ringing out. Everyone turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of shock and concern. I strode toward the stage, my heart pounding. "This isn't the time or the place, Sarah. Stop this right now." Emily stood frozen, her eyes darting between us. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What are you two talking about?" I reached Sarah and grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the microphone. "You've done enough," I hissed. "You're not ruining this for her." But Emily wasn't letting it go. "Dad, what is she talking about?" she demanded, stepping closer. I turned to her, my heart breaking. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just your mom being emotional." Sarah pulled away from me, her eyes blazing. "No," she said firmly. "It's not nothing. She deserves to know." Before I could stop her, she turned back to Emily and said the words that shattered everything. "Your father? He's not your biological dad." The world seemed to stop. Emily stared at her mother, then at me, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "What?" she whispered. "Emily, listen to me," I said quickly, stepping toward her. "This doesn't change anything. I'm your dad. I've always been your dad." But she backed away, shaking her head. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Is she telling the truth?" I hesitated, the weight of the moment crushing me. "Yes," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "But it doesn't matter. You're my daughter, Emily. Nothing changes that." Tears streamed down her face as she looked at me, then at Sarah. "How could you do this?" she cried, her voice filled with pain. "How could you both lie to me?" "Emily, please," I begged. "We didn't want to hurt you. I love you." But she shook her head, turning and running from the garden. The guests stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. I didn't care about them. All I cared about was Emily. I turned to Sarah, fury in my eyes. "This is your fault," I spat. "You couldn't leave well enough alone. You've destroyed her." Sarah's face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I ran after Emily, desperate to fix what had been broken. I found Emily sitting alone on the edge of a quiet lake near the garden. The moonlight reflected off the water, casting a soft glow on her tear-streaked face. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, her wedding dress crumpled beneath her, but she didn't seem to care. "Emily," I said softly, approaching her. She didn't look up. "Leave me alone," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I can't do that," I said, sitting down a few feet away from her. I didn't want to push her, but I couldn't let her suffer alone. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the faint hum of the reception in the distance. Finally she spoke. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I sighed, the weight of the truth heavy on my chest. "Your mom told me today, right before the reception." She turned to me, her eyes filled with pain. "And you didn't think I deserved to know? You were just going to keep it a secret?" "I didn't want to hurt you," I said honestly. "I didn't want to ruin your wedding day. I was scared. Scared of losing you?" Her expression softened, but only slightly. "You've been my dad my whole life," she said, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Because it didn't matter," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It still doesn't. Blood doesn't make someone a parent, Emily. Love does. And I've loved you since the moment I held you in my arms for the first time. That will never change." She looked down, her fingers tracing patterns on the ground. "But it changes everything," she whispered. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're Emily," I said firmly. "You're smart, kind, strong, and the most amazing daughter anyone could ask for. Nothing about this changes that. You're still you and I'm still me. We're still us." Her tears started again, but this time they weren't as heavy. "Why would Mom keep something like this from me?" "She was scared," I said. "She made a terrible mistake and she's been living with the guilt ever since. But that's between her and me. It has nothing to do with how much I love you." Emily sniffled, wiping her eyes. I don't know what to do with this." "You don't have to do anything right now," I said gently. "Take your time. Feel what you need to feel. But just remember you're not alone in this. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." She leaned into me then, her head resting on my shoulder like she used to when she was little. "I'm so scared, Dad," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I know," I said, wrapping my arms around her. "But we'll get through this together. I promise." The two of us sat there for a long time, letting the stillness of the night soothe the chaos inside us. I didn't have all the answers and I knew the road ahead would be difficult. But as long as Emily was in my life, I would do whatever it took to protect her happiness. That night I made a vow to myself. I would never let Sarah's betrayal define us. Emily was my daughter, my family, my everything, and no secret could ever take that away.